So today I'm going to show off two forks of the same patch. They're very similar. There's some subtle differences between them that may work better. One may work better for you than the other, but both of them are polyrhthmic pitch delays. So they both have this same interface. I'm going to try to get the basic gist of the patch down and then move on to the differences between the two and then talk about the similarities. The basic idea is that you have three delays that are created by loopers and a fourth delay created by a delay line that feeds into them. You don't hear this delay line, you hear the feedback that moves through it. And we can position each of these delays at a different point in sort of the rhythmic landscape. So if we look at this display here, what we're seeing is a division of the clock. Not like a clock, not a clock division, but a division of the clock. And what I mean by that, and there's an easy way to show this, if I change the time on this fourth delay that feeds into them, we see this flash faster and then slower and then slower still. So what we're seeing is this is 1/4 of the delay time and this is 2 times the delay time. And we can get divisions between those, equal divisions, so 1/2, 3/4, etc. And because of that, we get these sort of evolving rhythmic things. So we can position each of these delay lines so that they, first of all, record for different amounts of time, because this affects how long each of these loopers record. So the longer the time, the longer the looper records. And so they'll have different contents in their buffers. And then we can position this feedback line to feed different divisions of the clock into them. So you get these really interesting relationships between the delay lines, but also this feedback loop that's feeding into them, because the loopers will start to record at different times and catch different moments in that feedback loop. So this is the original TimeChasers. And just real quick, at the bottom we have controls for pitch and reverse. We can change those pretty easily. And keep in mind this is speed pitch, so it'll change the playback speed along with the pitch. And then pre-feedback and post-feedback, which is where the loopers feedback into themselves. So you get those ascending pitch things that happen when a pitched up looper or pitched down looper feeds into itself, which can add some complexity and some interesting sort of trailing aspects. Okay, so that's TimeChasers. The second version is TimeChasers Genteel. And that isn't to say the first one is rude, but this one's a little bit more predictable, at the expense of some of the things that I just talked about. So I'm going to refute myself almost immediately. But we have, again, these same divisions of the clock, but you'll notice that the lights don't flash at different frequencies. That's because in this version, instead of the loopers recording different amounts of time and playing them back at different rates, they all record at the same rate. And then after the loopers, there are delay lines placed that we get divisions of, that we can move further and further away from the original point of entry. Explaining this either very well or very poorly. I can't really tell. I think it's very poorly. But So here, all of these loopers are recording at the same time. Again, they're not really going to sync up so great because they're playing at different speeds. So when content comes out, depending on where it is in that buffer, it might come earlier or later, whatever. But then we can further delay that amount. And here we'll also notice that this doesn't change. This is still the control for the delay line that feeds into those loopers, or the feedback line that feeds into those loopers. But here it just shows the tap tempo. And these lights just show the recording phase. So the tap tempo is twice as fast as the recording phase, so that each beat of the tap tempo is one whole recording phase. Because it'll go up and down, and anyhow. So it's a little bit different. Let me just give an example. We have the same controls on the front page, but there's one additional control that this patch has that the other patch does not have, which is a post feedback mix. So we can control the amount of post feedback, that feedback that comes from the output of the looper and goes back into it, on the front page for both patches. But in this patch, what we can do is decide what percentage of that feedback comes from the output of the looper and what percentage of it comes from the output of these delay lines that follow the loopers. So when you set different percentages, you can get more rhythmic complexity because we're getting sort of two taps out of each looper that's being fed back into the system. So it's pretty regular, when the feedback amount is set to 0. This means that the feedback is taken directly out of the output of the loopers, and because they're all recording at the same time, we get pretty regular results. Let me turn the post feedback up. But if you take that and mix in some of the delay outputs, you get which may not sound like a huge difference, but it is a way to add a little bit of character or rhythmic complexity to what's going on here. So I'm going to go back to the original. Oh, the one other difference between these two patches is that the Gentile version, because it has these delay lines, uses a reverb light. The original Sauce version uses a plate reverb. So there will be a slightly different quality to the reverb. I think the reverb light kind of works well for some of these sounds. So, it's a little bit washier than the plate reverb. But yeah. And I forgot to mention, if you're this far along in the video, which most people are not, I know what my statistics are. The noise box I'm using here comes from an Etsy shop called Come Together as One. This is not a paid promotion by any means. I just got this. I really like it. I think it works well with this sort of patch. As do more melodic elements. The original idea behind this patch was some sort of like arpeggiating delay, and it can kind of do that, but it really lends itself well, I think, to these sort of complex, to rhythmic sources or atonal sources, where you can take something that might sound a little bit simplistic and make it more complex through these delays. So just going through the controls again, both patches share these controls. We can turn the delay lines off. and maybe that's a good way to start. I'll leave this delay line on and I'll just change its pitch to no change in pitch. So now we have one of the loop delays and then the feedback loop delay. So and you could leave all of the loopers at sort of unity pitch, the original pitch, and build some pretty interesting, just sort of polyrhythmic multi-tap delays without any of the pitch shifting reverse, anything like that. But we can add reverse, and I'll do this because and I'll turn up the post feedback, because one thing you'll notice is that because the sound is reversed and then fed back into itself, which is reversing that sound, you get this palindromic feedback where the sound will play in reverse, then forward, then in reverse, and this affects all of the loopers. It's a little bit less noticeable when you're, doing real fluttery pitch up stuff, but it's worth pointing out. But, when we change either this delay line that I don't have running any feedback into it, but if I change that, and one of my favorite things, actually, I'll show you, is to put this delay like this. And what happens then is you have this really fast sort of feedback that feeds into the looper, and you get, well, you get this as it, really plays quickly. But if we change that time or change any of these times, we get different rhythmic relationships between this feedback loop and the loopers that it's feeding into. So there's a lot of variety that can come out of this. And we can mix these pre and post feedback routes to get different sort of things. So I like often putting the post feedback pretty low, particularly if I'm working with sort of a faster tempo, so that the regeneration of the high pitch stuff, it kind of comes quickly, if that makes sense, and trails off. I'll just change. I really like this tempo. I'll change to tap tempo. Okay, so those are the controls for the delay lines. You can turn them off and on. Down here we have some sort of, I mentioned there's there's reverb decay and reverb mix. There's also a couple of additional effects. There's an aliaser. This was a late addition. It seems stable, but if you run into any clipping, let me know. This is probably the thing I'd remove because it is a late addition. But you can change the aliasing frequency, which will give you sort of different characters. Let me really reduce it so this is more apparent. I thought it lended itself well to this application. I generally like aliasing, though, maybe more than the average person, so your mileage may vary there. And then there's a low pass filter. when you pitch up, and particularly when you have feedback of that pitch up, it can get kind of chirpy up at the higher registers. So the idea here is just something that you can, dial in to tame that. If I open that up a little bit more. And if we turn it down pretty low, we get a more murky response. Then there's a dry level and an input level, rather than a wet level, I should say. So this controls the amount of gain that goes into the delay lines. And so, it's something you kind of adjust beforehand rather than after the fact, because the audio is already in there. That's a bit of a CPU save in this case. I should say also that the patch sums to mono and then creates a stereo image using a Haas effect and the reverb. So it passes stereo audio and it produces a stereo effect, but the audio that's coming in gets summed before it comes out, which is something you may want to keep in mind. But, I'm just going to show off, maybe I'll show off one other thing, which is you can get some pretty good shimmer reverb sort of sounds out of this patch. Turn the post feedback way up. I'm just setting the sort of delay times pretty fast, and then I'm going to max out the reverb mix. I might need to adjust that still, but it should get us in the ballpark. So if we go even faster, if we turn the reverb mix back down, we're going to get not quite the same effect. Oh, I forgot to point out what the stomp switches do. Okay. So, yeah, the stomp switches in both of the patches, these two stomp switches do the same thing, which is tap tempo. Or this one does tap tempo. This one will max out the pre-feedback decay. So what that means is that whatever is in the buffer of that delay line and anything that gets added to the buffer of that delay line will keep being fed into the loopers. So I'll just start out with it already pressed. That sound won't decay as long as I'm holding down the stomp switch. The middle stomp switch does something slightly different. So this patch, when you move these loopers around, the relative phase of the recording periods can get out of sync because they start working on different temporalities. And so, what I mean by that is if one of these loopers is set to record at the clock speed, the tap tempo speed, and the other one is set to record at twice as fast as that at the 1/2 point, it should be that every other time the faster looper records, they should begin recording at the same time. But the phase gets moved around when you adjust these things, which can be cool. Like right now I have them out of sync, these two loopers that are in that sort of relationship. But you might want to reset their phases. So now we see that they're alternating in the way we would expect, which can get, you know, sort of a more expected response. And then on TimeChasers, thought this was kind of cool. It doesn't need a phase reset. The loopers will sort of sync to the tap tempo or MIDI clock. And the delay lines don't need a phase because they're a ring buffer instead of one that is recording in discrete periods of time. But I said, well, dang, I have an extra Footswitch, so let's do something with it. And what it does in this patch is it reverses the playback direction of all of the delay lines. So if this delay line is playing in reverse, it'll switch to forward. If it's in forward, it'll switch to reverse. So I just thought that was kind of a, you know, fun thing to play around with. You can sort of change what's happening for all of the delay lines all at once. That is TimeChasers, which, well, I'll throw it out there. For anyone who made it this far, can you guess what the reference is? And at the same time, can you also remember that I made another sort of polyrhthmic multi-tap delay patch about a year ago called Chaser? So this one probably has a bad name. It probably muddies the water, but that's just life. It gets harder and harder to name these patches. I tell you, this was a working title, and then I got used to it, so now it's TimeChasers. And, you know, in my mind, delay lines kind of chase audio around. So that's TimeChasers. I think it's a really cool patch. I tried to make the interface sort of fun and interactive, and I hope that worked. If you check out the patch on Patch Storage and you like it, please go back to Patch Storage and hit the like button for the patch. As I would suggest you do for any patch that you download. It means a lot to me. I suspect it means a lot to other creators to sort of see that appreciation and recommendation to the rest of the community. But that is TimeChasers. I'll put a link to this shop in the description. I'm not sure if I mentioned that when I started talking about this. I love this little box. And yeah, that's it. That's what I got today. Have a good day.